No matter where you are in the world, get ready to be hooked. Nero castrated this boy to replace his dead wife, a story so powerful it will leave you speechless. What happens next isn't just surprising, it's unforgettable. So hit that like button, subscribe for more, and share this with someone who loves a good story. From the US to the UK, from Asia to Africa, this one's for you. Let's dive in! In the grandeur of ancient Rome, power was never merely about governance, it was about spectacle, domination, and the ability to bend reality to one's desires. Nero Claudius Caesar, the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, understood this better than most. His reign, spanning from 54 to 68 AD, was characterized by extravagance, ruthlessness, and a relentless hunger for control over both his empire and the people closest to him. Among the many tales of his excesses, none is as disturbing, tragic, and unforgettable as the story of Sporus, the young boy whose fate became intertwined with the emperor's obsessive grief and cruel imagination. To understand this story, one must first step into the turbulent world Nero ruled, where political intrigue blended with personal indulgence, and where the boundaries of morality were constantly tested. Nero's life had always been steeped in controversy. Born as Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, he rose to power at the age of 16, largely because of his ambitious mother, Agrippina the Younger. His early reign, guided by the philosopher Seneca and the praetorian prefect Burrus, showed promise, yet as Nero grew into his role, his darker instincts began to dominate. By the time he was in his mid-20s, Rome had witnessed not only his lavish public performances as a singer and actor, but also his cruelty in dealing with political opponents, senators, and even members of his own family. It was within this atmosphere of paranoia, desire, and unchecked power that Nero's relationship with Poppaea Sabina emerged, a woman of extraordinary beauty and ambition who became both his passion and his undoing. Poppaea Sabina had first been the wife of Otho, one of Nero's companions, but Nero's desire for her eclipsed all boundaries. He forced Otho into exile and took Poppaea for himself, showering her with wealth and status. To Nero, she was the perfect embodiment of elegance and refinement, a woman whose charm captivated the emperor in ways no one else could. Yet their relationship was fraught with volatility. Nero's temper was infamous, and his inability to balance passion with restraint often led to violent outbursts. Ancient historians recount that in 65 AD, during a heated argument, Nero struck Poppaea in a fit of rage, killing her and their unborn child. Whether this account is entirely accurate remains debated, but what is certain is that Poppaea died young, and her death plunged Nero into despair. For an emperor accustomed to bending the will of Rome to suit his pleasures, the finality of death was intolerable. It is here that Sporus enters the story. Sporus was a boy, described by sources as delicate, attractive, and possessing features that bore a striking resemblance to the late empress. In the cruel eyes of Nero, he represented a possibility, an opportunity to erase the loss he could not accept and to reconstruct Poppaea in a form that still breathed. To the people of Rome, such an idea would have seemed grotesque, but for Nero, grief and obsession merged into a single, terrifying command. The boy would be transformed. The boy would become Poppaea. The first step was castration, a practice not uncommon in certain Roman and Eastern traditions, but one that carried immense stigma and cruelty. By ordering Sporus to be castrated, Nero not only stripped him of his masculinity, but also ensured he could never escape the role forced upon him. The act itself was symbolic of Nero's dominion. He could unmake and remake a person entirely, reshaping them in his desired image. For Sporus, it was the violent end of his childhood, a mutilation that turned him into an unwilling vessel of another's memory. Rome's whispers would forever carry his name in connection with this act, sealing his place in history not by his own deeds, but by the emperor's tyranny. Once the physical transformation was complete, the psychological reshaping began. Nero dressed Sporus in the finest garments once reserved for Poppaea. Silk robes, golden jewelry, and the elaborate hairstyles of an empress became his daily attire. He was paraded in public not as a boy, but as a woman reborn. The emperor insisted that he be addressed as Sabina, demanding that courtiers and senators treat Sporus with the reverence due to an empress. It was not enough for Nero to have him at his side. He needed Rome to accept the illusion, to participate in his delusion, to watch silently as a boy was stripped of his identity and forced to embody the shadow of a dead woman. The most shocking moment came when Nero staged a wedding ceremony. Before the eyes of his court, he married Sporus, as though the boy truly were Poppaea returned from the grave. The ceremony had all the grandeur of imperial rituals, vows, celebrations, and feasts designed to display the emperor's power and his refusal to be denied what he wanted. Sporus, clothed in bridal garments, became the Empress of Rome in name, though in truth he was little more than a prisoner of Nero's obsession. The empire, bound by fear of the emperor's wrath, complied. Senators who might have whispered disapproval in private dared not confront Nero publicly, for to oppose him was to invite ruin. In this union, the cruelty of Nero's rule was laid bare. His authority extended beyond laws, beyond customs, beyond even the natural order of life and death. To him, Sporus was not a person with his own will, his own future, his own dignity. He was a replacement, a living statue molded to soothe the emperor's grief. And yet, for all its grotesque grandeur, the charade could never erase the truth. Poppaea was gone, and Sporus was trapped in a role he had never chosen. Ancient Rome may have been accustomed to spectacles, but even by its decadent standards, this transformation was extraordinary. The whispers that passed through its marble corridors spoke of an emperor who had gone beyond madness, who had turned grief into cruelty, and who had destroyed a boy's life to satisfy his own need for control. For Sporus, the days after the wedding were a blur of forced appearances and suffocating roles. At banquets, Nero paraded him as his wife, introducing him to foreign dignitaries as if the empire itself accepted this illusion. In private, the boy endured the weight of expectations he could never fulfill, treated as both lover and possession. The identity of Sporus faded, consumed by the shadow of Poppaea Sabina, until the two became indistinguishable in the emperor's eyes. To those who observed from a distance, the image of the young empress at Nero's side was haunting, a reminder of how absolute power could twist even the most sacred bonds of life, love, and death into instruments of domination. Rome, meanwhile, was not blind. Its people gossiped, senators muttered in silence, and historians recorded with fascination and discussed the strange relationship that unfolded within the imperial palace. The empire had endured emperors with vices, but Nero's actions went beyond indulgence. They represented a collapse of boundaries, a rejection of reality itself. The emperor who had ordered the burning of Christians, who had killed his own mother and wife, now forced a boy to take on the guise of the woman he had lost. It was a story that blended tragedy with horror, spectacle with cruelty, and it ensured that both Nero and Sporus would be remembered not for greatness, but for one of the most grotesque chapters in Roman history. After the wedding that shocked Rome, Sporus's life entered a strange twilight, where he was both visible and invisible, honored as an empress yet imprisoned as a boy stripped of his will. Each day was a performance. The palace echoed with music, feasts, and Nero's theatrical displays, and in the center of it all stood Sporus, veiled in silk, forced to smile as though he were truly Poppaea Sabina reborn. Rome's elite bowed and addressed him as Augusta, while foreign envoys looked on in bewilderment, compelled to play along with the illusion crafted by the emperor. The cruelty of this masquerade was that it left no space for Sporus's own humanity. He was not allowed to be a person, he was merely a mirror reflecting Nero's desires. The boy had little choice but to comply, for defiance against the emperor meant death, and perhaps worse, oblivion. The Praetorian Guard, the Senate, the court entertainers, all played their parts, enabling Nero's fantasy because to question him was to court ruin. Sporus moved like a shadow through the gilded halls, dressed in jewels and ornaments that weighed heavier than chains, his every gesture scrutinized for how closely it resembled the late empress. At times, Nero seemed to convince even himself that Poppaea had returned, addressing Sporus in intimate whispers, calling him by her name, speaking of memories that belonged to another. The line between grief and madness blurred, and in that blurred space, Sporus was trapped. Nero's obsession, however, could not protect him from the tides of history. Outside the palace walls, discontent brewed. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD had already blackened his reputation, and though Nero had blamed the Christians, the The city whispered that it was he who had ordered the flames to clear space for his grand architectural visions. The people grew wary of his extravagance, his endless performances on stage, and his neglect of the empire's real struggles. Among the legions, loyalty wavered. Rebellions flared in distant provinces, and whispers of conspiracy drifted closer to Rome itself. In these moments of crisis, Sporus remained at his side, a haunting figure whose presence reminded all of the emperor's grotesque detachment from reality. While Rome burned with unrest, Nero clung to his illusion, parading Sporus as proof that he could even command life to return from death. Yet the empire could not be ruled by delusion alone. By 68 AD, Nero's enemies grew bolder. Governors in Gaul and Hispania rose in defiance, and even within Italy, support began to crumble. The Senate, once cowed into silence, sensed blood in the water. The Praetorian Guard, sworn to protect him, began to shift their loyalties, calculating where power might settle once Nero was gone. The emperor's world, once gilded and unshakable, began to collapse. Through it all, Sporus was dragged along, forced to accompany Nero as his empire unraveled. It is said that Nero continued to treat him as Poppaea, clinging to him like a talisman against despair, as if the illusion could shield him from reality's advance.